The Indian city of Jamnagar is a money-making machine for Asia's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. His company Reliance has the world's biggest oil refinery complex here in the city, producing 1.5 million barrels of crude every day.
Jamnagar is a district in Gujarat. It's a coastal town. If you go to the place, it's mostly a vast arid stretch of land, and that is where Ambani chose to build a massive complex, and it kind of just stands out in the landscape.
Jamnagar is also where Ambani is making his newest bet, a $10 billion investment in green energy. His ambition is closely aligned with the Indian government's plan to reach net zero emissions by 2070 and expand its renewable energy to record capacities. But Ambani is not alone. India's second richest man, Wogautam Adani, has committed $20 billion of investment over the next decade.
The impact of two biggest business tycoons entering into renewable will create a lot of competition. It will bring in lots of investments. It will create plenty of jobs, and it will push Prime Minister's target of transiting into a greener energy by 2030.
But India's massive dependencies on fossil fuels and plans to obtain more coal from abroad have some environmental advocates questioning the realism and sincerity of those green ambitions and those of its two biggest billionaires. With the power to drive India, one of the world's biggest greenhouse gas emitters, towards a green energy future, are these two billionaires ready to abandon their fossil fuel fortunes?
These two conglomerates, the Reliance Group and the Adani Group, have set out an extremely ambitious roadmap for themselves ahead. Now, the real test of the pudding will be in the eating.
The people of the subcontinent of India had been promised a certain degree of self-rule by the British.
When India gained independence in 1947, the next 2 decades or so were marked by Soviet-style planning, where there was a government-led development plan. That began to change in 1970s when the government slowly started stepping back, and that space was filled in by these large business families who had sprawling businesses across different sectors that we now call conglomerates. The 1980s onwards is when Reliance Group, under Mukesh Ambani's father Dhirubhai Ambani, came into prominence. That was an iconic group, much storied, and made a lot of wealth for its shareholders. The Adani Group, in fact, came a little bit later, in late 1980s, but in prominence towards the beginning of this century.
Mukesh Ambani is Asia's richest person, among the richest in the world. He built his empire on fossil fuels, oil and petrochemicals. And lately, he has started his telecom venture, which is doing pretty well and is expected to grow even further. Wogautam Adani, like Mukesh Ambani, is another very smart businessman.
He's a college dropout. He moved to diamond business and then later on moved back to Ahmedabad to join his brother's plastic business before he started his own Adani Enterprises in the 80s. The conglomerate has businesses ranging from ports to coal mining to running airports. Adani and Ambani, they are the two big tycoons. People say that they are the modern day Rockefeller.
Today, as India's rich entrepreneurs like Ambani and Adani prosper, the country's inequality gap is widening. Research shows that India's richest 1% hold over 4 times the wealth of the poorest 70% of the country's population.
So last couple of years of the pandemic, the stock market sprinted away, and that added a lot to the net worth of the billionaires at the top end, including these two tycoons, Ambani and Adani. There were millions who couldn't find jobs, who saw their salaries being cut.
Some attribute the success of these billionaires to their relationship with the government. Ambani and Adani have aligned their business strategies with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's goals and made huge fortunes.
Some critics have said that the relationship between the Adani Group and possibly the Reliance Group and the Modi administration is a bit too cozy. but that is something which every stakeholder involved in this has denied. So Adani, Ambani and Modi, all three of them hail from the western Indian state of Gujarat. Ambani, while he is now Mumbai-based, has a lot of assets like the world's biggest refinery, the twin complex of Jamnagar in Gujarat. And Adani still has their base in Gujarat, and they have power plants and ports and a lot of infrastructure. So both these groups, they have their roots and a lot of the source of their wealth tied to that one state, in which Modi was the chief minister for a decade before he ascended and became the prime minister of the country.
Last year, the country's two richest men came under attack over farming laws. Protesters alleged that the laws were designed to allow the billionaires to enter the farming market. The tycoons say they have no such interest. Now, with the Modi administration's ambitions to move India, the world's third biggest emitter, away from fossil fuels, Ambani and Adani are both making big bets on green energy.
Since Narendra Modi took charge in 2014, his government has given tremendous impetus on clean energy. India's energy mix is extremely tilted towards fossil fuels. Around 45% comes from coal, around 25% comes from oil. Gas, again a fossil fuel, slightly cleaner fossil fuel, has about 6%. Biomass has a significant portion. And the balance that remains is shared by hydropower, renewable energy, and nuclear power. So these are still very, very small fractions in the overall energy mix today.
In total renewable energy, we have just about crossed 100 gigawatts, and the target now is to reach 175 gigawatt by 2022 and ultimately reach 450 gigawatts by 2030.
Businesses that act on the urgent need to limit incremental global warming will secure the largest opportunities over the next several decades. In this race to avert ecological disaster, the world could use Indian leadership.
Adani Green Energy is one of the top players in this field. The company's main business is solar energy generation, and it has a portfolio of about 15 gigawatts of renewable energy, 15% of the country's total renewable capacity.
Adani Green Energy has seen a lot of investors' interest in the last year, and the stock price has shot up 600 times. That has added almost $20 billion to his net worth.
But the billionaire wants more. Adani Green Energy aims to become the world's largest renewable energy company, and Adani said he will invest $20 billion into the sector over the next decade. But his journey to domination might not be easy, as Mukesh Ambani joins the game.
The world is entering a new energy era, which is going to be highly disruptive.
Ambani is known for a big disruptor. Wherever he has entered, he has actually broken cost barriers. Telecom is the latest example. 6-7 years ago, people thought that his telecom venture, Jio, was a small company, but today it's probably the largest telecom service provider in the country.
Very warm good evening.
Reliance Jio, they have stormed the market. All the existing players, they have been bleeding under the stiff price competition that Reliance Jio has brought in. Reliance's main business strategy has been the scale, the huge scale they bring in to every business they get into. There's a scale that kind of bulldozes the competition. Similarly, he is going to replicate the same scale in renewable space as well.
Ambani says he will invest $10 billion in solar, green hydrogen, batteries and fuel cells in the next 3 years, overlapping with Adani's plan. Both billionaires are also focusing on manufacturing, and making solar panels could be one area in which they compete fiercely.
There are two factors basically. In bringing down the cost of renewable energy, you need cheaper solar modules and cheaper capital. Cheaper capital is something that both of these groups can leverage. The interesting thing about Ambani's plan is that in solar modules in India, Ambani is the first one who is attempting to make solar modules right from the start of the value chain. He's planning to make polysilicon, he's planning to make wafers, cells, and modules. His idea is to bring down the cost even further, because right now India gets about 80% of its module supplies from China. Ambani wants to change that, and he wants to show that India can build the solar modules right from scratch.
I'm sure Wغோதாம் Adani will face a lot of competition in the manufacturing side from Reliance in years to come.
Another battleground could be manufacturing electrolyzers. Electrolyzers are used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. If the process uses electricity generated by renewable energy, the hydrogen produced is called green hydrogen.
Hydrogen is still a very nascent renewable energy, and everyone is talking about getting into green hydrogen. No one in India, at least, have started producing green hydrogen so far, but that's going to be the ultimate fuel which everyone would love to have, a green hydrogen where cars, the tailpipes will only emit some little bit of distilled water. Mukesh Ambani has gone on record saying that he targets to produce green hydrogen at $1 per kg. The current rate is extremely costly all over the world. If Reliance can target $1 per kg of hydrogen, that's going to be a big game changer.
Adani has plans to produce cheap hydrogen as well.
We are strongly positioned to produce the world's least expensive hydrogen, which is expected to be an energy source, plus feedstock for various industries that we intend to play in.
The good thing of this is that it is only going to help Indian renewable energy consumers. The government will be really pleased with this competition, because when these two large businessmen compete, the prospects are extremely bright for costs to come down even further.
But finding space to carry out all of these ambitious projects is an imminent challenge.
Land is a problem for everybody that wants to set up an industrial base in the country. Many of the times you need to dislocate people, so there are issues about it.
While Adani hasn't secured lands to set up manufacturing facilities, Ambani has. Next door to his huge fossil fuels complex in Jamnagar, Reliance is building solar and hydrogen plants with an aim to help build 100 gigawatts of solar energy by 2030. But reactions in the city have been mixed.
और हमारा गांव में छोटा मोटा सब गांव का आदमी विकास किया है. अभी और रिलायंस का प्लान आने वाला है, सोलर प्लांट, और इसके बाद आएगा तो हमारा मोटी खावड़ी का गांव लोग का धंधा सब चलेगा. इसके बाद आजू बाजू का 50 गांव का आदमी का धंधा भी चलेगा.
Everybody wants green energy, clean energy. I don't think that Reliance will be able to divest its investment in a refinery very soon.
The age of fossil fuels, which powered economic growth globally for nearly 3 centuries, cannot continue much longer. The huge quantities of carbon it has emitted into the environment have endangered life on Earth.
On the face of it, this is a sharp pivot for Ambani's fossil fuel empire. But oil is still king, contributing nearly 60% of Reliance's $73 billion in annual revenue.
That is a sore point. The company, despite growing in the renewable energy sector, it will keep on making good money out of fossil fuels. I'm not sure when they want to actually completely get away from fossil fuels. That is not on the horizon.
A report has shown that Adani is also boosting fossil fuel assets despite vowing to be carbon neutral.
So we found that Adani is looking to roughly double its coal-fired power capacity from 12 to 24 gigawatts through the construction of 4 new coal-fired power stations and the expansion of at least 2 existing plants.
One of them is the Carmichael coal mine in Queensland, Australia. The company plans to transport the coal from Australia to countries in Asia, including India. The project has been under fire from environmental activists and been refused funding from banks.
From a climate perspective, Adani's Carmichael coal project is its most dangerous of its new fossil fuel projects. it could become Australia's biggest coal mine. And from the projects that are currently proposed in the Galilee Basin, the coal burnt would use up about 6% of humanity's carbon budget for 1.5 degrees. There is no transportation infrastructure for mines in that area. They are getting the approvals. They are actually building that first mine in the Galilee Basin. We are very concerned that if that's allowed to continue, then more mines could be built in the area. And that is just billions of tons of coal that will make it much, much harder to hit the goals of the Paris Agreement.
But it also has green projects on the anvil. So the real question is that can they ramp up their green projects to the point where they can be carbon neutral? That's the objective. And that's where the real tightrope walk will come.
Moving away from fossil fuels is hard not just for Ambani and Adani, but for India as a whole. Modi has committed to reach net zero by 2070, but that's a big task. Nearly 70% of the country's electricity came from coal power plants last year.
For another few decades, India is still going to rely more on fossil fuels, although renewable share will move up quite a bit going ahead.
There is obviously a dilemma among the energy policymakers that India has abundant reserves of coal, and how do you kind of completely get away from it? Emissions will keep coming from the industries that use coal. So how do policymakers balance that out?
In the very short term, India's vast population at the lower end may not immediately benefit by the green initiatives announced by the two tycoons. The only benefit that we can think of is maybe more jobs coming through these projects, because it'll take time for these projects to come online. It depends on how they're executed and how they perform, how they deliver. Those are the variables that will determine the roadmap for these conglomerates, how successful they are, how they create wealth or destroy it.